So today we are with Martin Nolt, who's been active real estate agent for almost 12 years. He has helped a lot of people buy and sell investment properties over the years. He has worked in Langley, Surrey, all over the place, but he specialized in Mission. So a lot of my viewers, a lot of my colleagues, and a lot of new investors are not aware of with what's happening with Mission. So we're going to get all the information and maybe more than what people can digest in one podcast. But hey, let's find out what we can about investing in Mission with the most professional guy. So Mission is a really happening place for last 5 years. A lot of people last 5 years really get to know Mission, all these development properties, and Mission has this huge, biggest upside. What do you see happening in Mission in next 5 to 10 years?
I think Mission is probably one of the most overlooked cities in the Fraser Valley. It's one of those neighborhoods that is kind of the last to take off and the first to slow down.
Hmm.
So Silverdale itself, Silverdale is basically a neighborhood community plan in Mission that's essentially going to double the size of the city. So obviously, when times are good, developers flock to any opportunity. But now that the market's slowed down a little bit, what Polygon is doing in Silverdale, um, I think that I see it myself. I see a lot of investors starting to call me again, whether it's listing, whether it's buying. I find a lot of medium to large developers are seriously considering investing in smaller cities that kind of complement cities like Abbotsford or Langley or Maple Ridge or Coquitlam or whatever it may be. So I see Mission as probably one of the you know biggest hidden gems. And I wasn't always from Mission, right? I originally moved here about 14 years ago, started in Chilliwack, then Abbotsford, did a whole lot of work in Surrey, Grandview Heights, Willoughby and Langley, Port Kells in Surrey. But I find that Mission itself is severely overpriced. Its proximity to Vancouver is second to none. I mean, you take the Fraser Valley Express, or West Coast Express rather, City Council, a really good OCP, and as well as just an environment that is, I wouldn't say riskier, but often overlooked by other investors. But I mean, with that said, you have one of BC's biggest developers, Polygon, essentially, willing to and ready and currently doing developing
A master plan
a
community.
master plan, right? So I think it's 18,000 homes for a total of an eventual 40,000 residents, which is going to double the size of the city. So when you have one of the province's biggest developers staking that much of their reputation and also capital, you know that it's not something that is going to be um, it's not something to be taken like lightly. So just to give you an example, like I often get, every couple of weeks, I get a call from a hedge fund in Toronto asking what is the value of Polygon's assets in Silverdale.
Oh
Um,
wow! So lot of people are eyeballing the future
a lot of people are
investments.
a lot of people are keeping an eye on it, and a lot of people are also poking around and trying to get good deals. But the reality is that the infrastructure is going to be there within a couple of years, and a lot of people who are purchasing land around Polygon's assets have reaped incredible rewards, right? So
So moving forward, how important is Silverdale for future investment in Mission?
I think obviously it's incredibly important. I think that the way it was done, where Polygon essentially led the master planning of Silverdale, the city was able to continue focusing on areas like the waterfront, Cedar Valley, and even now North Mission. So I think that it's incredibly important, but oftentimes it's overlooked because it doesn't necessarily receive the same press that let's say something that's led by the city mission. Maybe not the same press, but Polygon, I mean, they've, I think they're slated to, they have applications currently under, for about 600 units. And that's a mixture of small single family lots, townhouses, and, they're not stopping it. It's far too large of a stake for Polygon to bite into to just let it stand. And currently they're By the end of the year, they're already going to be at the end of Gun Avenue. So essentially, phase 1A is going to be completed.
Okay.
So everyone else who's purchased land just north of that, or directly adjacent to it, they have already reaped the rewards. So currently, Silverdale is still at the price per acre stage. But pretty soon, as infrastructure is brought, into the area, it's turning into price per unit, price per door, price, per lot, right? Raw lot pricing. So right now we're still hovering at around the, 500 to a million range per acre, which is, unseen in the rest of the Fraser Valley. And the end product is only selling for, 15 to 20% less than, let's say, Maple Ridge, Abbotsford, 30% less than Langley. But the land cost is so much lower that it just makes a ton of sense, right?
My understanding was Polygon bought 3,400 acres in Mission. Is there still land available if somebody wants to buy some cash flowing property, maybe let's say 3, 4 acres with a house, and they're okay with holding it 5 years? Is there still smaller parcels available without easement, without right of way? Is
There's
it
de-
possible?
there's definitely some cash flowing properties in Mission, especially in the last year. I wouldn't say necessarily acreage. I've continued to say that its Mission is often overlooked, but there are quite a few investors, developers that have taken note, especially in recent years, like, for example, Polygon.
Mhm.
And you have a city council that's very adamant about growing the city, about growing the tax base, about offering a different housing product,
Mhm.
which can be seen with what the city has allowed Polygon to do, right? So one developer is essentially going to help develop or increase the city by 2 times, right? So from 40,000 to around 80,000 is a massive, massive, massive undertaking. So anyone who purchases land in the adjacent area, or the similar phasing, or even anyone who purchases nearby and has enough money to put in the extended infrastructure, is they're going to make off pretty well, right? So
So, if I'm a new guy, what advice do you have for new investors? How can you eliminate risk, or how can you make that future potential land less risk free, or what kind of risk should I not take as a new investor?
yeah, I would say, and I always tell everyone this, like if I was to give my mom advice, what I tell her to buy. So there's a few different ways to protect yourself when you're buying land. You know, Seeing the most lucrative investments have been people who have purchased nearby an established developer. So you're essentially protected by three things. You're protected by natural inflation. You're protected by the developer's reputation that you're surrounding, or that's surrounding you rather, and also just the slowly improving market. So rather than buying just a single family house in a city that, and basically waiting for the market to get better, or for Polygon to, bring services closer. So
So once the infrastructure comes in, it add value to those existing properties. So as an investor, you will see return on your properties as the city move forward with the infrastructure.
exactly. So, when you sell land early on before the infrastructure work is completed, you're buying it based on a price per acre. So let's say it's 300 or 400,000 per acre. And as soon as the infrastructure is there, then it's just basic math. You're calculating, okay, what are construction costs? What are the land costs?
So do you see a lot of land assemblies being done, just like Surrey or Langley, where people are putting whole bunch of homes together and cities allowing high density? Do you see a lot of like small condo units, or do you see people still buying acreage and developing acreage?
I think one of the biggest misconceptions about land assemblies, I used to do a ton of them in Fleetwood, in Port Kells. Land assemblies are only efficient for smaller lots. When you get acreage, you're actually limiting the buyer pool unless you have to hit a minimum developable area, or for underground parking restraints. Oftentimes, you actually get a little bit less.
Do you see Silverdale becoming next Brookswood or
Oh,
next
yeah,
Willoughby, where the major
yeah,
infrastructure is missing, but the density is
yeah.
there and the development is
Okay.
there? Yeah.
So I think Silverdale, just in its scale, 3,400 acres. A lot of it is green space, so it's kind of more modern development with kind of denser housing forms, but a lot of parks, a lot of open space, a lot of creeks. But what they've found is that it's actually a pretty hard area to develop. There's a lot of green space, and even just pulling the infrastructure to an area that is developable is quite difficult. So now they're kind of seeing what Genstar was so challenged with. But Polygon's an incredibly capable developer. They've worked alongside the city mission, and I think they have a great plan that is also malleable. So the one interesting thing that they did here was Silverdale was created as a reference document and not an OCP amendment, which means that there's essentially a rough guideline of what should be built there. But if you take a very well done application to the city mission that's slightly above maybe the density that's designated, or maybe some smaller lots or a different housing form, the city mission has proven to be pretty flexible in terms of housing forms and what they want in the city. The one thing I would say is that Mission definitely needs a few other large developers. I've worked with Qualico and Infinity. A lot of them are waiting for Polygon to get to a certain threshold before jumping in. And I would just say that
So if I'm an investor, and what should I know about changing zonings or new OCP in Mission? Do you see any new OCPs getting kicked in, or any DCCs being?
well, I'm very encouraged by Metro Van's reduction of DCCs. I think that developers have really struggled in the last few years, whether it's with financing or construction costs or anything. So it's good to see other cities kind of pioneering the reduction of DCCs. I'm hopeful that Mission would maybe consider that, because as a growing city, and as a city that's kind of trying to attract larger developers and more development activity, you kind of have to sweeten the pot a little bit to welcome them, right? So I've had meetings with some of the province's biggest developers, and I've taken them right to City Hall. The head of planning, the head of engineering, they're all there. So we're kind of open for business, right? And that's what initially brought me to Mission, is just the opportunity. I mean, I purchased quite a few properties myself. They've done very well, and I've seen what Polygon's done. Some other local developers, what they've done. I genuinely think it's one of the hidden gems of the valley.
With the interest rate fluctuating, it going up and down, the last Bank of Canada meeting, they were saying it probably goes up. Do you see anything different in the smaller towns versus Vancouver? As an investor, do I have a less risk or more risk when it's come to fluctuating interest rates?
I would say that a lot of smaller developers are getting squeezed quite hard right now. People are getting their loans called. People are not getting their mortgages renewed. And I'm talking about investment land, not necessarily residential. So I think that, as I said from the start, is Mission is a city that is kind of the last to take off and the first to slow down. But in that sweet spot of time where people are interested about it, it goes crazy, right? So it's kind of making that jump from a small city to a major city that no one overlooks, right? So I often call Mission the Surrey of 10 years ago. Not so much developers. There's a few now, and I won't share too many names, but there's a few large Vancouver developers that have picked up a couple sites and are basically waiting to get Polygon to complete their infrastructure work and then submit their applications, right?
So what kind of buyers are you getting right now? Are you getting a lot of Metro Vancouver people? Are you still getting overflow from Surrey Langley, where people are selling their investment property that's in Brookswood or
Yeah.
Surrey, and coming to Mission to get more for their dollar or acre here?
I would say, like, you know, maybe for residential, it's, a lot of that kind of, horizontal trade. But for myself, the calls I'm getting recently, which is, probably 10 or 15 a week, is from large developers that are maybe under the radar. So not the Polygons, not the Qualicos. Like, I talk to them often, but it's like, and not to put too much focus on race, but some very well established Indo-Canadian developers, some very well established, Vancouver-based Chinese developers that, have weathered the storm, are really well capitalized, and aren't necessarily, you know, risk averse. So they don't mind jumping in early as things are about to take off. So everyone's been saying, for the last few years, rates are going to go down, things are going to pick up. You know, who knows when things will really take off? But I think if you make the right purchase with the right deal structure, you're much more protected than, let's say, buying in a really, saturated market, like let's say Willoughby. And we're at the point now where infrastructure is almost in. So you don't have to, rely on polygons so much. You're just doing math. And at that point is it's a lot safer for people, right? Because you're doing a pro forma versus just speculating.
Thank you, Marty. There you have it, Marty Nolt, serving mission for almost last 12 years. Timing and due diligence, everybody should do their own. But if you need more consultation, if you want to have advice or second opinion on any property that you want to sell or buy, by all means, I will mention Marty's number at the bottom of the screen. And I have a link to his website. By all means, give him a call. And it always is a good idea to get a second opinion and then see what your money can buy. Maybe a little out of Metro Vancouver because there's not many acreage, as we all know, in Metro Vancouver, and especially the young guys that always want to have acreage to live on. Plus, they want to sit on a future development land. I think Marty is the right guy. By all means, give him a call and let's do some business and let's stay attached and to the real estate.